And we're live. It is Friday, April 25th, the year of our Lord 2025. It is 8 o'clock a.m. in the Bay Area, which means it is something like 11 o'clock a.m. in the center of the universe. Um, our guest has shown up with a dog tie, which I have to say is badass and sets an important standard for future guests on this show. Um, I am mildly jet lagged and have a crazy few days ahead of me, filled with attempts to keep my employees, my organization solvent, so my
Mm.
employees employed, filled with chatting with federal judges in Napa and some socializing along the way. Look,
Sounds
folks.
terrible.
It sounds terrible. We are not allowed to have fun anymore. But the sun is shining, not here, but somewhere. The
Here.
birds are chirping. I suspect they're chirping here, but the walls are kind of soundproof. It's going to be a great freaking day. And Mr. Cactus,
Oh, not prepared today.
bad.
You're watching Dog TV, a connecting revolution in morning television.
You are watching Dog Shirt TV, and it is a freaking revolution in morning television. And one of the revolutionary features, of which there are many, is that sometimes our guests get in on the act and wear dog Christmas ties. And, you're not going to see that on Fox and Friends.
True.
And another one of the revolutionary
You might
features.
at Christmas, actually.
Yeah.
Pretty
But
cringe.
on the other hand, I'm not likely to become a cabinet secretary.
No.
You never know. The standards have been brought so far down that we're all qualified now.
Yeah.
And
Go ahead. Sorry.
and another one of the revolutionary features, of course, is that the show is at an unstable time, which is to say 8 a.m. in whatever jurisdiction I happen to be. Holly, why don't you introduce our guest?
Well, before I do that, I also want to say that another revolutionary feature is that I am actually wearing clothes today, like not pajamas, but actual clothes. And I have brushed my hair already. I've put in my contacts because of the later hour. And I've even put on some lip gloss and mascara, and this is as good as you will ever see me until I get some tips from Pete Hegseth in his makeup studio. So,
Well, Pete Hegseth, whose days are numbered.
Yes.
Um, I I think when he is done being the Secretary of Defense, maybe, a little later this afternoon, um, uh, if he wants to do get ready with me videos, we will be, uh, a forum for that for him. We're there for him, and if he wants to make makeup videos with us, we can, do, cat
goodness,
eye with Pete Hegseth.
that a cat eye sharp enough to kill a man. You need to get Anna Bauer to teach you that, frankly. So
Well, we're working on that,
she's
and
for real, man. That woman is she's got the game going all the time when I see her. But me, I'm very low maintenance. Someone asked what brand I've used. Honestly, I can't tell you, but in another 5 years, when it is time for me to once again buy new makeup, because the makeup I buy lasts like 5 years because I wear so little of it, I will buy Makeup Addict regardless of whether the tariff war is ongoing or has been resolved. I do plan to buy makeup from makeupaddict.ca.
and and of course, MakeupAddict.ca is the sponsor
Yes,
of
sir.
Dog Shirt TV, though they in fact give us no money or
Or
or And they're probably embarrassed when I
There's
say that, but this show is brought to you by Mexican avocados and
South African
Canadian,
wine.
South African wine and Canadian makeup.
That's right.
All right, Holly, this time for real, why don't you introduce our guest?
Our poor long-suffering guest. So our guest today is John Hawthorne, who is a sociologist and longtime professor at multiple Christian universities, and has now written a book on Christian higher ed called The Fearless Christian University, in which he basically tries to save Christian universities from themselves. Is that fair to say, John?
That is my quixotic attempt. Yes,
All right, all right.
going
So
after all the windmills I can find.
So anyway, he's one of the good ones. He's trying to fight the good fight out there. And I wanted to start with just the title of it and the whole sort of theme of the book, which is fear. I think you correctly identify how these institutions, as a product of white evangelicalism, they are very they're almost at this point. I would say their reason to be is fear in many ways, to sort of protect the youngs, the vulnerable, impressionable youngs, from the scary secular world. And so we shuttle them into these institutions that we carefully control. And you're saying that that's not good.
No, it's not. Well, first of all, and start where you. Thanks for having me. It's an honor. The I liked how you placed it in the context of sort of the larger evangelical movement, not just in education. Um, so I'm always struck with the fact that according to all of the recent research from the Public Religion Research Institute, uh, white evangelicals think that Christians are discriminated against slightly more than Muslims and blacks and gays and Hispanics.
And
Um,
Jews, they're not. Are they more discriminated against than is Ben? I wonder. I mean, Ben is discriminated against just because he's Ben. I mean, let's just be
I,
clear.
you know, and I
He's clearly
will.
doing something.
We might unpack this a little bit later. Um, I uh, I have gone to the trouble of reading Pam Bondi's first report on the anti-Christian bias task force.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah, it's short and it's mushy, um, but it's all in the context of they treated me badly. They I would.
How are they saying they've been treated badly?
Oh, would you like to know more?
Or just from your exposure to this world, how are they? Because
Yes.
you mentioned in the book that actually Christian universities have been and churches and other organizations have been hysterical for years now
Yes.
about being treated badly, and the
Yes.
government is the big bad scary government is going to come after them. And how are they? Is there actually any evidence that they've been treated badly?
It depends on where the threshold is for treated badly. Um, so let me share with you, given your background, I'll share with you something from Secretary of State Marco Rubio in the report.
So
Uh,
great.
he shared how State Department employees were stigmatized for opposing the COVID-19 vaccine mandate on religious grounds, including being called murderers and troublemakers. In one instance, an ambassador yelled at an employee, accusing the employee of wanting to kill the ambassador's mother despite her being back in the States. I
Well,
don't know what that means. I don't,
I didn't
and
realize
so
that that was part of our religion. So,
opposing vaccine mandates is kind of a core Christian
Yeah,
value.
I mean, there's
It's
that part
clearly
in
held.
John 4:18 where Jesus endorses ivermectin
That's right.
and hydroxychloroquine and says that under no circumstances shall ye let your arm be penetrated with a needle. So, there is scripture behind
Yes,
that.
that is true.
Well, it's
Um,
on your exegesis of that scripture,
that
and
is
going to the Greek. You would have to go to the Greek.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, it all gets washed out in
yeah.
these fake translations we've
Right.
had in recent centuries. But if you go back to the original Aramaic before the
For
Greek,
the Greek.
it's very clear that he's talking about ivermectin. All right, so perception of bias, um, and a perception of themselves as a minority culture that should be the majority culture, right? That's sort of the historic majority culture that's kind of entitled to authenticity, but is in fact now a persecuted minority. How big a component is that of the fear?
So there are kind of two contributing factors in my mind. One is this, Christians used to be the only, and actually we should say white Protestant Christians, because the Catholics came in and caused all kinds of stuff, and the Jews came in and we didn't know what to
Drank
do with all that.
beer.
So now we're talking about, vague Judeo-Christian values that founded our country, and we have strayed from that. So there is a sense, a mythology that we were in control and everybody thought like us. And then stuff changed, and in 1962 the Supreme Court took mandatory prayer out of school, and that was it. And then the secularists took over, and they have been on an ongoing fight against the true Christians ever since. um, so there is both a things weren't, back in the day when America was great, before again, then this is how the world worked, and we were in control, and those women knew where they belonged, and all of that. And then, uh, and then diversity happened within the broader culture, and white evangelicals have not been good at pluralism over the course of their history. I mean, they don't know how to say, well, this is our position. You have this other position, and we'll figure that out. But they don't do that. They perceive everything as threat.
And that's not very good for critical thinking, which is an interesting then sort of intellectual culture to have as a foundation for institutions of higher learning.
Yes, I was trying to weave my way back to the colleges,
Right.
so thank you.
Yeah. And let me add on to that question of so these institutions have actually been around a long time. The one I went to, which was a Southern Baptist school, was founded, I believe, in the 1890s. I'm a little fuzzy on that. Yeah, like 1890s. Some of them are more recent. Some of them are more the post-World War II brand of evangelical. But a lot of these schools have been around for a really long time, including back when maybe these cultures were the dominant one. So I'm wondering what was the reason for creating them in the beginning, and then how have they changed over the years, and then and how has their sort of justification for existing influenced a changing educational environment?
So
Sorry, that's a
let
great
me
question.
let me ask a question first.
Hmm.
I know your institution was Southern Baptist. Did it have any roots as a Bible institute before it became a college? Do
I
you
think
know?
not. I think it was a college. It had a school of theology, but they've actually recently abolished the school of theology, which
Oh,
is
cool.
really crazy because it got too liberal. So they
Yeah,
just,
yeah,
the state convention just axed it.
yeah. Um, Okay.
Wait,
I
I have a slight antecedent question to
No
this,
problem.
which is there are many colleges and universities that have historical or current religious affiliations. So I went to one, Oberlin College, which
Oh.
was a Congregationalist school until at some point it kind of separated from it had a seminary and it
Hmm.
separated from it and then uh, got rid of it entirely. And it was, quite fervent in the evangelical, a sort of left evangelical culture of its day. What's that?
The North, the Northern
Yeah,
branch.
That's
I
right.
mean,
That's right.
it was a major stop on the Underground Railroad, and it's the first coeducational institution in the world. It was the first institution in the world higher education institution anyway, to accept blacks. And, you know, and of course it was pro suffrage and
Mhm.
pro, uh, uh,
Abolition.
well,
But then,
militantly
Yeah.
pro-abolition to the point of, it was William Lloyd Garrison's sort of Western outpost for speaking, but it was also, very pro-temperance. It was a dry town until
which it
like
should be. We should all be.
the 90s, I think, was, when you finally started to be able to get a drink in Oberlin, Ohio. Um, but yet you would never confuse it with a Bible college,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so what is the difference between, other than the particular inflection of Christianity, what is the difference between one of these Bible colleges or schools like the ones that Holly went to, uh, and kind of, regular religious institutions that have religious affiliations of one sort or another?
That's I'm glad you raised that because it's an important kind of context. This doesn't work exactly, but if I were to try to characterize it, it's the difference between an institution with uh, an institution of higher education that happens to have a religious affiliation and an institution for whom its religious identity is central to what it's doing. Um, so the what we call the church related colleges are in that former category. And in fact, one of the great myths of Christian higher education has to do with the number of times I've heard the Harvard story that Harvard started out as a ministerial training institution. It was committed to these values, and then look at how they drifted over the years, and now look at them, and even though it says truth on their motto, they don't believe in truth, and we believe in truth. And I mean, there is that contrast that goes on. And if my history is correct, um, Harvard changed their position because the board sat down and said, we're not going to survive just relying on ministers, and so we have to broaden our base, and made a decision to kind of reconfigure what Harvard was about. But that mythology of, if you're not careful, we're all going to go that way. We're going to lose our way, which is a theme that shows up in my book frequently, of these Christian universities in constant fear that somebody's going to call them out for not holding true, for drifting to align with the broader culture and not realize the enemy that the threat that it is. So I mean, I think that is an interesting distinction, and I think I would my my rough characterization of sort of central versus one of the many factors that define the institution is a way that I would do that. Does that make sense, Holly?
Um, yeah, yeah. I wonder, like, this is my impression based on, so my parents went to the same college that I went to, obviously 30 some odd years before me. Um, they went in the late 50s and early 60s when, evangelical culture was the dominant one. And academically, I would say they got a, for the time in particular, when also when people were not as many people were going to college, but from my impression of them, and also I think they're well educated people, my impression is they got a good education there, like overall. I mean, it didn't do anything to shake their faith, but in terms of liberal arts,
Right.
they got a good education. Fast forward to me going there in the 90s, a different time when evangelicals are starting to feel on, even though the religious right, that was kind of their heyday in the 80s, but then they lost the 92 election, and that's when you really get to start the feeling of being embattled. And I certainly had that feeling as a young person going into adulthood and going to college like that. And then when I went to graduate school at a secular institution, I felt like I was going to war, I just felt like it was. And I would say, and then I went back and taught at that same university. And the education just it's not good. It's not the quality of students is not good. A lot of them are homeschooled and frankly do not have a foundation, an intellectual foundation or a critical thinking foundation. And I just see over the years, just in that one institute, and now they're struggling to survive,
Right.
And I just see in that one institution of where, when you make it about basically defending a cultural position instead of a place of actually learning, even if you're not really changing what the learning is, like it starts to crumble.
You raise, I mean, you raise an interesting point that I wish I could learn more about. I wonder if the the professors your parents had were more free to, well, based on what they taught in class, the style they used. I mean, they probably didn't stand up in class and talk about everything that was wrong with the Southern Baptists. I
No,
mean,
no. I wouldn't say it was particularly enlightened. It was just like more, the culture was more, I don't know, like I think that the dominant culture, like intellectual climate, and the evangelical one weren't at such odds. And so there was much more of there was much less energy spent on defending a position versus like actually engaging in.
yeah. That makes sense. Yes, the issue with, students who come, first of all, students come from a variety of backgrounds to Christian institutions. I did first year I was in Michigan. I was teaching an introduction to sociology class, which I would teach. Actually, the last time I taught that class was in 2011, and as a means of trying to illustrate kind of what sociologists do, I asked them where they went to high school, what kind of schooling they had, and asked them to divide the room, do one of those exercises where you wander around, and all of you who went to public school go over there, and all of you who went to private Christian school go over there, and all of you who homeschooled go over here, and it was about a third each, as I remember it. The fun thing was that the homeschool quadrant or third, the homeschool third, made a point of distinguishing between homeschool and homeschool. The
And
latter,
what is the difference?
the difference is that the latter make their own clothes, and have long hair, and the women have long hair, don't cut their hair. The men have short hair. They just stick out. But the homeschool, the other homeschool kids, came from a variety of reasons, but most of them was because they were opposed to the values of the public high school. and why the Christian high school wasn't an appropriate alternative to them is an interesting question. It has to do with a lot of family dynamics. And all I'll say is that one of those homeschool students, that his mother wrote the letter that was the only time I ever had anybody write a letter to the president suggesting I be fired. So
Why would she want you to be fired?
um, the student was in a social problems class, and uh, the textbook criticized Reagan's um, Mexico policy of don't not being able to provide uh, any I can't remember exactly how that works. Not being able to provide any um, medical instruction on the availability of abortion through federal funding kind of
Oh,
stuff.
the Mexico City policy.
That's it. That's
Yeah,
what I
yeah,
was trying to say. Thank you.
yeah.
But I wasn't articulating it well. That was the textbook. And the son had told the mother this fact that this was a problem, that Reagan had done this, but had told the mother that I had said that rather than the textbook had said that. And the mother, who's probably not watching at the moment, uh,
I'm probably
And
not.
if she is, uh, to the mother of this student in Michigan, it's okay to admit you were wrong, lo, these many years later.
Yeah.
she was the president of Michigan Right to Life
Uh-huh.
and
Well,
kind
there
of
you go.
ambushed me after class and wanted to have a conversation. And just to finish the story, she said, "What's your position on Roe v. Wade?" And I said, "It's the law of the land." And she said, "It's immoral." She says, "It's immoral." And I said, "I understand your position. It's the law of the land. What are we going to do with that?" And therefore I should have been fired. So
Yeah. That
we,
yeah, go ahead, Ben. Do you have a question?
Yeah, so I just wanted to sort of steer you back to the book a little bit.
yes, thank you.
The um, so the essence of the sort of organizing principle is fear. Where does fearless come from?
So the central thesis of the book, uh, there, there are two really important contrasts. One is between the trustees, administrators, and donors on the one hand, and their fear of higher education in general, right? I mean, they're mildly suspicious, I think one could say. Uh, but the big driver is the contrast between those folks who are running the institution and the students they're trying to reach. So I have this whole litany I can do about uh, a student who would be starting at a Christian university in this coming fall. And she is born in 2007. Um, Same-sex marriage had already been legalized in Massachusetts before she was born. She was 8 when Obergefell became law. She was in those elementary years when the first of the sort of Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, etc., that when those happen and then go on. She's in her early teens when the Me Too movement explodes, followed by the Church Me Too movement on its heels. Um, and these are very real concerns for her. And she's watched it all unfold on her cell phone that has been available to her entire life. Um, and so I hate the word worldview, but the perspective of the trustees and donors who generally are looking backward at maintaining continuity with some past identity and the concerns of this generation of students, of whom 10% are white evangelicals, is just a huge contrast. So the response then is to center those student concerns and to make clear that what you're doing as an institution is trying to serve those students well as they are going to be 20 years down the road from when they arrived. So they're being the kinds of leaders and with character and spiritual vitality and compassion and ability to collaborate and understand kind of working with people who are different than all those things you want of a graduate. You put that at the center of what you're doing, and that allows fearlessness. So there's a obviously there's a lot of other things in the book, but that's the central thesis, is that Christian universities cannot, there are too many of them to all try to out-conservative each other. If PRI is right and there's 10% of Gen Z who are white evangelicals, then there's not enough of them to go around.
Or can they reach out? And maybe they could also reach out beyond,
Well,
like there's a lot of Black evangelicals. There's
there's
a
a,
lot of
there's a,
Hispanic
there's a
evangelicals.
chapter in there about diversifying the market pool. It's also true that I mean, to draw on one story we had, you don't have to be a Congregationalist to go to Oberlin, right? And Oberlin can own its
In
values.
fact, well, I mean, it's a very good. That's ever since the '60s. That's kind of a
Yeah,
joke as to
yeah,
Oberlin, but I think the better example would be you don't have to be a Catholic to go to Georgetown, right?
right,
Or
Like
right.
Georgetown is a deeply Jesuit
That's
institution
right.
with a crucifix in every classroom, and yet the average student of Georgetown may, uh, will really is there because they want to go to school in Washington, not because
Yeah,
they, you
and it's
know,
a good school academically.
it's a
Like it's
yeah,
terrific school,
really
and so it has this, and of course it's, I think, frustrating to a lot of church traditionalists how secular Georgetown has become, but there are a gazillion other Catholic institutions and Jesuit institutions, and even within Washington, there's Catholic University, which is, directly administered by the Vatican,
hmm,
but has non-Catholic students,
right,
right? And you can, I mean, I think Catholic would be an unusual place to go if you weren't Catholic, but you can,
right,
and
right.
it's not unthinkable.
yeah, yeah.
So if the values are clear at the institution, if its identity is clear, then there's nothing threatening um, about having. Well, actually, I should back up. There are already incredible varieties of, as soon as these colleges started adding more and more athletic teams so that they could keep their enrollment up, particularly to work on their gender imbalance issues, which many of these small schools have. Um, you have a lot of people who came to the school that Holly went to, or the school that I was fine, the school I retired from, because they wanted to play baseball. And they understood they had to go to chapel to do that. They might have to take a couple of Bible classes. And then there are great stories of people who were people of no faith, who were people of faith by the time they graduated. But nobody requires that. And so we're already kind of dealing with that diversity complexity. So
Oh, Brigham Young's another example, I feel like, because that's a Mormon university,
yes,
but I feel
yes,
like academically it's pretty rigorous. Obviously, they have good sports, so they have a lot of non-Mormons there. Um,
Are you saying Mormons aren't good at sports, Holly?
well, actually, I'm sure they are because honestly, they seem to be good at
Yeah,
a
they're kind
lot.
of good at everything.
They're kind of
If you're
immediate.
doing all that walking for 2 years, you have to be in good shape.
Yeah.
But
And then Wheaton is another one too, where I feel like that's an evangelical school, which is, I think, intellectually rigorous. Um, but here's my sort of problem with the whole. I have a I feel like you get to a point like why do you need a religious institution period then? Do you know? Like if really the ideal is that you are creating a free thinking intellectual environment where I guess where you're processing your faith in a you know in that environment, do you get if that's the goal, like do you get like you do get to the point where you're Oberlin or Harvard and it's basically just not even part of your identity anymore? If that's what you're pursuing, because there is, the evangelicals are fond of talking about the slippery slope,
Yeah, yeah.
but it's true. Like you start opening your mind that okay, I guess what I'm getting at is religion is in many ways fundamentally closed-minded, and education is fundamentally open-minded. And do they really go together at all?
Obviously, I think they do. I mean, A, because I devoted 4 decades of my life to it, and B, because I wrote a book that argues that they are. The so how do you go about that? How do you maintain? I think you maintain the faith identity uh, through good hiring, through critical thinking that is, I don't know, I'd say faith informed. Um, so avoiding the bifurcation of faith and learning. I have for decades railed at this pet phrase that Christian universities like to use of the integration of faith and learning. And I many years ago wrote that we don't believe in integration; we believe in desegregation. Um, that and but we really kind of hold to a separate but equal kind of stance. And what we really need to do is to say, what does that look like? How does that come together? And there are lots of stories I could come up with about what that looks like. And I think the best way to get there is, again, to begin with the students. If you begin with the institution, and the institution, we're going to protect the institution at all costs, then the students are kind of left out of the equation, which is a silly thing to do. I mean, I have a friend who was a college president, and we were talking about an issue, and I told him over a decade ago that at the end of the day, the school was going to have to choose between its mission and its market.
and
Uh,
you go for the market.
and I go for the market. Actually, I go for going for the market and then reinterpreting the mission in light of the contemporary market. That would be a more
That
fulsome way
doesn't
to say
sound
it.
very inerrantist of you.
Yeah,
Um,
I
yeah,
was about
I,
to say
I'm
usually
not.
usually when we have these conversations, no matter where they start, Holly brings it to the problem of inerrancy,
Yes,
and I kind of roll my eyes because, like, you know,
Weren't raised evangelical, that's why.
well, right.
actually,
I
I
mean,
would, I would,
even
I,
you
sorry.
know, like inerrancy seems to me very silly, but it is a premise that people are working with, and I can't blame everything on it. But it does seem to me that the context of education is really one where um, if you're going to teach people to read critically and carefully, you have to challenge the idea of inerrancy because, you know, there's just too many intratextual problems.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
but secondly, if you're gonna pretend to, you can teach somebody engineering, but you can't, without challenging inerrancy, but you can't teach basic science.
yeah, yeah.
And so my question is that 10%, that is the market, are they walking in there? Do they want to be challenged on the 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 most basic premises, or do they want some synthesis of, like, what is the market for high quality education with inerrancy?
Well, I two two comments before I kind of try to dive into that. One is that the commitment to inerrancy in a Southern Baptist university in Texas is going to be about as high as one can get. Maybe if you go to Alabama, it's going to be worse. But there's a whole bunch of cultural reinforcers that are going on, not just within the university and the Southern Baptist Convention of Texas, but Texas broadly. Um, I've got anyway. I'll leave that. I'm going to take a tangent. Uh, the second thing is that I have not worked I spent my career in mostly Wesleyan institutions, and they have a high value of scripture, but not a high value of inerrancy. And so I haven't seen the tension play out in quite the same way. I knew some individual faculty members, who I remember, having the classic anti-evolution posters on his wall. This was at a Presbyterian school in Kansas, and he was a scientist, so he was a chemistry professor, but he also had tinfoil over his windows, so in his house. So
But look, you can teach a lot of chemistry
you could, yeah,
without believing in evolution. When you get into the biochem stuff, it gets a little bit
it
tricky.
does, it
But
does.
but but I'm thinking more about, um, there are things you can't do, not believing in evolution, like biology.
Yes, yes,
And by the way, you got some physics problems with the
yep,
age and size of the universe, right? Um, you've got all kinds of problems in fields like yours, right?
yeah,
Where
yeah.
how you how you react to um, different social organizations becomes, uh, and I I mean, look, in my world, in Judaism, this was is mostly a resolved issue,
Yeah.
in the sense that, um, the interpretations are, generally speaking, not sufficiently literal to preclude the vast majority of modern science. But including in pretty ultra orthodox communities, there are outlying exceptions. But if you take 7 days literally as
Mhm.
7 days, you're going to have a hard time training scientists.
Yes.
And I, I don't understand how you resolve that, except with some, either we're not interpreting this too literally, or we're accepting, which I understand to be the total opposite of these colleges' missions. We're accepting that science and religion exist in sort of separate domains.
So when I think about some of the best faculty members that I've known are people who've had to wrestle with these questions. And generally speaking, they move to autobiography. They talk about being in grad school and what happened when, usually it also goes back to a trusted mentor from their own undergraduate experience. But then it goes into, I was in graduate school and I started reading these things, and I was reading things I never had confronted before. I mean, this is particularly true
That's what happened to
with,
me in
yeah,
history.
this is particularly true with Bible scholars. they go off to grad school and they find out that this is not the way they were taught as,
They go to seminary and become atheists.
yeah. Um, but then they find themselves having to teach an intro to biology class or an intro to Bible class. And one of the things that they want to do is to make clear to students at a kind of accessible level that things are not always the way you were taught. And there are good ways to do that and bad ways to do that. And a faculty member that worked for me once who thought it was his job to stand up in class in an intro to Bible course and explain why the home pastor and the trusted Sunday school teacher were stupid. Didn't go well.
That doesn't go.
But generally speaking, there's an identification with where the students are and what's going to be threatening with this. And you say, by the way, did you know there's two creation stories? And their minds explode, and then you kind of walk with them back through that. And I think that is rigorous critical thinking.
Yeah.
It begins, again, I'm still in the same spot where I put the student's experience at the center of what the institution is doing. And so recognizing what the student has brought in and what their questions and concerns are and what their fears might be, and helping them then address the question about what do we do with evolution? What do we do with the fossil? My wife taught geology for years. What do you do with the age of the earth? If it's more than 6,000 years old. And there are going to be students who are upset, and there are going to be this is my kind of bugaboo when I was an administrator, calls to the president from the pastor of the parent of the kid's roommate who heard that the pastor in the New Testament class said this thing. And he said, what are we going to do about that? And I said, I'm doing nothing about that until, you got something where somebody actually did something that you thought needed attention, but we're not acting on this. That was back in the old days when simple assertions of tattoos didn't make you go to facilities in foreign countries.
I was struck in the book, and also by what you're saying here. You talk about the students now they're more impacted by the outside world, or they're at least some of their ideas have evolved compared to the institution, and so the students are kind of the drivers of change. Although you're describing some scenarios in which maybe the students were, the sort of the problem. In my day, it was kind of the opposite. Like I found, certainly when I went back and taught at my same school, I discovered that the professors were like secretly not on board with the whole program, including myself. Like they signed the faith statement with their fingers crossed behind their backs kind of thing. And they even the I forget what his official position was, but the guy who I sort of signed my contract with basically sort of gave me a wink and a nod too, like we have people here. It says you have to go to church every Sunday, but we have a lot of people here who don't really, that's not really their thing. And like basically he hinted at me like it's not that strict as you, but we're not
going to come after you.
Yeah, the student body was the conformist. Like that's where I felt like completely hemmed in culturally. Like you just, not only were they just like incredibly conservative, but they were also incredibly unable to think critically. Like that was just something that they were not able to do. And just as an intellectual environment, I felt completely out of place as someone who likes to sort of think about I was very conservative myself, but I was more intellectually engaged.
Yeah.
But they were clearly not there to do that. So
So
do you think that shifted then, or?
I don't know. I think two things. Let me go back to your signed statement with the fingers crossed behind your back. The challenge of those statements is they say, "Oh, we're not going to hold you to that," until they do. When
Uh-huh.
they want to fire you, then they
Yeah,
could
yeah, yeah. No,
say, "You didn't go to church last week."
yeah, I got
Um,
divorced while I was there, and I
uh,
thought I might get fired. I could have been
yeah,
fired
yeah,
if they had
yeah,
wanted to.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. Um, I should also mention uh, the regional dynamic when you're talking about the students that are coming and their conformity and all the rest of it at Hardin Simmons in Abilene. That
Yeah, how much of this is a Southern thing and how
that
much of this is an evangelical thing?
some of both. I think that it's hard to disentangle. I'm trying to remember. I had a colleague who did I mean, a friend who did a study, and he used the institution I was at, and he used his home institution, which was Texas Tech, and he found out that there was that like faith commitments didn't predict a lot at Tech because the ambient religiosity, regardless of people's backgrounds, was so strong that it didn't distinguish. And so, again, I don't know how much of that is Southern. I never worked at an institution in the South. I've been mostly in actually northwest in California. So yeah, that's an interesting question. Although I wonder, I still think there's going to be a bifurcation among the student body. That the assumption of uniformity among the student body, even in Texas, is going to be harder to maintain, um, particularly over issues of LGBTQ affirmation and kind of racial awareness. I think those are probably the big two.
What
Yeah, those
about
are the
good
big
old
two.
fashioned sex? Is the, I mean, there's the LGBT
Yeah.
issues are a branch of this, of course, but there is a sexual purity culture that is no joke in
Oh,
these communities.
no
And if you
question.
grow up with one of these,
No
uh,
joke.
and you are constantly having that purity culture challenged in ways both healthy and unhealthy. And um, a bunch of 18-year-olds showing up at college are coursing with hormones, no
Yes,
matter how religious
that's right.
you or they say they are. And so, what is the, how much does the, um, just the ambient sexual tension of life contribute to this challenge?
Oh, it's huge. That the one of the reasons that many of these Christian schools, actually all of these Christian schools, because the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities changed their membership criteria to include a traditional marriage line. You got to commit to traditional marriage because, on the one hand, people, you send your kid to the Christian college so they'll marry the right kind of person, right? But you also don't want them to have sex. There is this inherent tension that has to be managed. Um,
I got married at 19. That's one way to solve it. A lot of
that
people get
a
married
lot of
very
people get married very young, um, and we were married young, and I look back on that and say, what were we thinking? At that age, what did we know? It's been only it'll be 49 in May, so we must have figured something out. The Yes, that's very real. So schools have restrictions on premarital sex, and increasingly in recent years they've done a good job of, well, they've done a good job of adding harassment policies, partly because that's now mandated by what we currently know of as the Department of Education. And so they've done that, but they're still kind of caught in that tension. I argue in the book that affirming LGBT folks shouldn't be difficult because these institutions have already said that you can't have sex till you get married. So who cares if they're gay or straight?
Right. Who cares who they're lusting after?
That's right. And I do comment that, that means that somebody might have to watch a couple of guys holding hands walking across the campus. But, I also comment that there's so much public display of affection on Christian college campuses, at all college campuses, actually, for the reasons you stated, that people wouldn't mind, having some restrictions that said you could actually walk into the residence hall lounge and not see people laying all over each other. But how to manage that? Because we're kind of affirming the marriage myth, which is itself problematic because if the gender balance of the institution is 60-40 female, there's a good chunk of the women there that don't match up. And, there's not enough guys to go around. So that becomes problematic. So no, this is a very real piece. And because these institutions have branded themselves as safe places where your young women can go to college and not be at risk of being hit up on by random people.
Only by Pete Hegseth.
Only by Pete Hegseth.
Yeah, I was going to say the ironic thing is they have a terrible, like Liberty University is like one of the most.
No, I was going to mention, and Liberty is just, their brand. Oh, the Liberty provost was one of the people who testified before the the anti-Christian bias task force, and said that they were fined for being a Christian school. Well, they were fined for violating the Clery Act. I mean, it was.
But harassing and raping women is very evangelical. So
yeah, it is. It ties in.
Get them to submit.
It ties in. It ties into the patriarchy submission culture, which is very much a part. Which I would point out, in my experience, is another thing that 20-year-old women are not going to put up with. So
that's interesting.
There's less the Theo Bros, the sort of conservative Theo Bros, are just like frantic. You wouldn't believe the stuff on social media. Just basically, they're trying to shame women, like try to scare women, like, oh, we're not going to marry you. But really, it's a projection. They're terrified.
That's right.
Because the women aren't going to marry them.
That's right.
And the women are going to be just fine without them, and they are like freaking the hell out about it. Let me tell you.
That is the I think that's the primary driver between the poor men movement, is they have staked out claims that make them unattractive partners. And because of changes in women's education, in women's occupational attainment, they're not needed in the same way.
You really see that in the Hegseth confirmation hearing, actually, where the claim in response to this, you sexually assaulted me while you were cheating on one
yes
wife with another, and two babies were, and the response is a total smirk from Hegseth,
right.
And then from Mark Wayne Mullins, this kind of bombastic, like, we're all imperfect, and saved by the grace of a good woman who doesn't mind being cheated on,
right.
Or raped. And I do think there's some point at which Oh, and I just noticed the time we
Yeah.
have to wrap. There's some point at which, you know, growing up with one of these as a woman, that's going to get really old.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep. Yep.
we have got to wrap. Hold up the book. Oops.
Yay.
Wait. There it is. The Fearless Christian University. Is the book, is it available yet? Or is that
It
is
is.
that
It came out 2 months ago.
excellent? So the author is John Hawthorne, our dog tie wearing guest. You're a great American, sir. And
Thank you.
folks, I have an announcement to make, which is that there is going to be no show on Monday. And the reason is that I will be on an airplane at both hours that we might do the show, both the Pacific Coast hour and the East Coast hour. So we're going to be back on Tuesday. Now, I know some of you are going to show up for the show and complain that there's no show, but guys, there's no show. And so when you show up here and Holly isn't there and the cactus isn't there and I'm not here, like, just remember that I told you so. Um, but we are going to be back on Tuesday. I don't know who the hosts are going to be. I don't know who the guest is going to be, but I know that you'll be there and I'll be there. Talk to you later.
Cool.